For the moment, let's go and talk at number 10 Downing Street to the Prime Minister, Mrs Thatcher, who's with Sir Robin Day.
Prime Minister, if I may start by asking you in House of Commons style, what are the Prime Minister's engagements for Friday, June the 10th?
Well, I shall be going across to Central Office soon because we have to wait for the rest of the results to come in. Then we shall have to start to think about reshaping the cabinet. I say reshaping. It's not as it was last time, having to form one from the very word go. So it'll be really rather like a reshuffle. But I think if I don't get it complete fairly quickly, then I think the ladies and gentlemen of the press will do it for me, and I think I'd better decide first.
Press are very good at cabinet making, aren't they? I understand you're having a strategy lunch with Mr Parkinson and Mr Tebbit, is that correct?
No, there will be some people into lunch, but I haven't quite decided who they will be.
Will that be a celebratory lunch or a cabinet-making lunch?
No, it'll be getting on with business lunch.
Why do you have to remake your cabinet? I mean, you're presumably quite satisfied with it?
One could carry on just exactly as is now. But I think somehow, when you come up to an election, I think it's the time to have a new look, and I think people rather expect a new look, and the combination of those two things is important. And in any event, I feel it's time to have a new look. It will still, may I make it perfectly clear, have a range of people in Cabinet. You always, as I tried to make clear during the election, try to reflect in your Cabinet the spectrum of views within the party.
Without seeking to ask you about details which you won't tell me about, are you? Is it the fact that some people want to move, or that you just want that new look you've just spoken of? Are certain things forced on you?
Well, look, what you have to do is that you've had a number of people in the House for quite a time. You've had a number of people in junior posts. You know, people who are climbing the ladder want to be able to climb up another rung. The terrifying thing and frightening thing for me, and it's the worst job I ever have to do here, is that means having to, if some people are to come on the ladder, some people have to climb off. And it's not because they've done the job badly at all. It is because you have to keep movement in politics in order to keep people with something to go for.
I think it was Asquith who said, perhaps in this very building, that a Prime Minister must be a good butcher. Are you a good butcher, Mrs Thatcher?
No, I'm not a good butcher, but I've had to learn to carve the joint.
Does the question of the speakership affect you? I mean, you have a part in this. Does the choice of your cabinet, to some extent, depend on who might become the Speaker of the House of Commons?
Well, I must consult with the Chief Whip about that, because it's very much a House of Commons matter. And, of course, we have to have made up our minds by next Wednesday, when the first thing the House meets to do is to elect a Speaker. And you'll recall, of course, that that takes place before we have the swearing in.
Are you satisfied with your result? You're obviously pleased. It was a triumph for you in terms of seats, but are you satisfied with the relatively small percentage of the popular vote which you got? And by relatively small, I mean it's smaller than you got last time, slightly. It's smaller than 55, 59 and 51.
And larger than a number of other general elections on which governments have been returned. I think it's inevitable with having another party. The more you fragment the parties, the more your major parties will get a smaller proportion of the vote. The danger is that if that were to go on, you'd eventually get weak government. You know the number of parties you sometimes get on the continent in some countries. They fight on their own little manifesto. No one gets a clear majority. They then go behind locked doors and they just plain do a bartering, horse-trading deal, compromising on everything they've said in the election. And sometimes it can take them months to form an election. That makes for really weak government.
To form a government?
To form a government, yes. Oh, yes, indeed. Their head of state calls someone in, will you try to form a government? And then the things fall apart regularly, and it makes for weak government. It is a bad system, and I hope will not go that way.
Nonetheless, even in your moment of victory, Prime Minister, will you think in answering this question about the 7 million people who voted Alliance, some 25% of the popular vote, yet who will see themselves with about 24 seats? Can you say to them that is fair?
I can say to them that some of the people in the SDP, had they still been returned for the Labour Party when the Labour Party lost, would have been absolutely adamant for the system that's given clear, decisive government, and particularly those who've been Home Secretary. What they want is a system that will put them in or they believe will put them in, and not a system which for generations has given good, decisive, strong government in this country. I think there's another factor. I think this result, as far as the alliance is concerned, is partly accounted for, not in any way by the alliance, because frankly the alliance did not do very well. They got quite a big proportion of the vote because of the extreme nature of the Labour Party. And had they stayed in the Labour Party and really fought from inside the Labour Party, I hope they would have been able to avoid those extremes. So I think it's a very unusual election from that viewpoint. And if I might look ahead, it's going to make predictions and forecasts in the next general election, which is what we're now working to win, very difficult indeed, because I think the Labour Party will ponder deeply after this election. Extremes are not for Britain. We're not an extreme people, ever.
And you're not going to be an extreme government with your huge majority?
I have not been extreme in the last 4 years. I'm not an extreme person, and we shall not be extreme now. I am adamant for freedom and justice and for defending it. And there'd be something very wrong if I weren't.
You said last night, Prime Minister, that government was a matter of trust. But that being your philosophy, how do you apply that to this huge landslide victory? I
think all power is a trust. Was it Disraeli who said that? Well, it is a trust. It's a great responsibility. And when you get a big result like that, if I may put it this way, you have to be even more careful the way you use that trust and the way you use that responsibility. I wonder if you'd understand that. I don't think I can add to it. It's just something that I feel deeply within me.
Do you also feel deeply that famous principle of Winston Churchill, in victory, magnanimity?
Yes, I do. There are a lot of people who are rather disappointed today, and there's some people in my own party who are a little bit disappointed, and some thrilled with famous victories, particularly after recounts. But we have to carry out what we were elected to carry out, and we shall. But we have to use power wisely and well.
Finally, Prime Minister, you mentioned the next election just now. Could you just tell us when the date of the next election was going to be so we can make our preparations?
It seemed that this was rather a good time of the year to hold it.
Prime Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, so we get a June election, but whether we get it in 4 years, 5 years, 3 years, I don't know, maybe 4 years from now.